Hey everyone, this is Jay Scott. I am the new coach for Fantasy Sports Insight Tennis, and welcome to the first strategy video. This will cover cash, GPP, and just general strategy because I know tennis is a niche sport. Not a whole lot of people have really played it before, and it's one of the reasons we have a big edge. And I'm looking forward to potentially teaching you guys something about tennis. And if you enjoy the content, I'd love for you guys to subscribe to our channel within Fantasy Sports Insight. We've got daily, weekly, and monthly VIP subscriptions. It could cover all sports or just tennis as well. Pretty much to give you a little bit about me, last year for Wimbledon, I took down 25K in the 100K $15 buy-in Wimbledon tournament. That was my biggest score to date in tennis. I have played $1,500 and $2,000 buy-in invite-only 5 days events. There's usually 30 men. Both of those events I was able to cash in the top 5. One time for $6,000, another time for $4,000. So still good profits there. Just shows that I'm able to compete at the highest levels against the other sharks. So I definitely think I have some things to offer you. I also qualified for this year's King of the Baseline. That was supposed to be for right now for the US Open, but it got pushed to January because they didn't get enough qualifiers yet. So that'll be 100-man, 3-day survivor with, I believe it's 50K to first or something like that, but looking forward to that. And then I've also had numerous other 4-figure scores. So definitely looking forward to helping you guys out. I know a couple guys in the channel had nothing going on last week. Jumped into our tennis thread. One of my guys, Zeekster, he first day playing, entered the $1 GPP, took it down on Draftkings. So just he asked a lot of good questions. We worked back and forth. We helped him build a couple good lineups and success day one. So hopefully we can get some of you guys working like that. So just to give you guys an idea of what kind of content that I am putting out, let me see if I can share my screen here. So every day we'll have a sheet like this. So this is definitely just a baseline, but this is an example of our Drafting Sheet today. So we've got our list of players. We got 84 players today and 42 matches. We got listed by salary. I pull in your Vegas odds for you, convert that over to a win probability, and then I go match by match. I do all my different research, analyze all your statistics. I give you a cash rating and a GPP rating. It'll be anywhere from red all the way to green, and I can explain what each of the colors mean in our thread if you end up joining with us. And then I give you usually about a 3-man core. Sometimes could be 2 men with your choice of a couple different players. And then I additionally add notes off to the side here. I give you some ideas of like ownerships and other things like that. So I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what that looks like before we dive into too much of the strategy. So just in general, for those of you who don't know, research sources for tennis are somewhat limited, and that's really one of the reasons why there's actually an edge and why I really encourage people to play tennis on DraftKings and FanDuel versus your other sports where you've got massive projections. And I mean, there's very few providers or people giving out picks. There's not as much information. I mean, a lot of people don't even know where to start here, but some people want to sweat, so they'll just throw lineups in. I mean, honestly, even your sharks, they may be mass multi-entering based on odds, but I mean, whether they have that tennis background or really understanding some of the GPP theory and stuff, I mean, I'm sure they do, but they don't have the edge and the leverage, and it's not as easily accessible to everybody as, say, a sport like basketball where you can upload projections and just run lineups based on that. Scoring in tennis is obviously more binary because you have a winner and a loser. It's not like he put up 23 points and 15 rebounds. And he scored 43 fantasy points. Typically, your losing players in tennis will score anywhere from 0 to 40 points, and then your winning players will score anywhere from 50 to 90. Anything above 85 is absolutely, it's usually pretty much slate breaking. They need to be in your GPP lineups, but that requires a 6-0 clean set, basically, because you get bonus points for that. And then they would also need to win in straight sets, which would either be winning 2-0 if you're for women, or 3-0 or 2-0, depending on the event for men as well. So jumping into just some general research sources, in general, you could look at your normal tennis website. So we'll do some previews, give you some background information. I like flashscore.com that I use for live scoring, but they also give you some previews. They have the world rankings, got some head-to-head statistics in the recent form. That stuff is good to look at. The number one thing in tennis, though, is going to be your Vegas odds. Vegas odds are just your best indication of anything in tennis, really, but you have to take them in the context of they're really just a representation of where the money needs to be for these sports books to even out the action. So they're not going to be terribly far off, because they don't want really sharp bettors to take advantage of them if they throw up, like, say Serena, for example. If she's actually 50-50, they might put her at -150 because they expect a lot of money coming in on Serena. So there'd be value on her opponent, who might be like +130, even though she has even odds to win the match. They know more money is going to come in on Serena. They're trying to even out the betting, so they will offer favorable odds on the underdog. So you need to think about that. The Vegas odds are going to be your most accurate representation of what's probably going to happen in the match and what the odds of a player winning are. But there are different things that affect that, and we'll jump into that a little bit later. But just in general, keep in mind, tennis is they say it's the second most bet on sport in the world, because it's always going on. There's always seasons, there's men's and women's, there's matches going on every day. There's a lot of people betting on it because there's a lot of opportunities to bet. So, I mean, I would say Vegas and your other sports books, they're going to have very good models to predict these matches. And aside from some adjustments that they put in there to balance out the betting and like keeping the popular players getting the same amount of money as the underdogs and the less popular players, they're going to be pretty accurate aside from that. So jumping into general cash strategy. So a lot of people like to play cash games. It's a good place to start if you're not wanting to, if you're trying to get a feel for tennis and you're not trying to multi-enter and go crazy when you first start off. So in cash, it's a very different approach than GPP, just like everybody would say for any sport. But in cash, you're generally going to want to maximize your win equity. So you're looking for that 6-player lineup that is going to essentially have the best overall odds to obviously score high, but to get wins, because that scoring is binary. Like I said, 50-90 for a win, 0-40 for a loss. So if you go 6 for 6, I mean, there's not really a slate that I could see you not cashing in cash games. 5 for 6, 4 for 6, depending on the slate. Those usually do cash as well. But in general, for cash games, you want to get as many favorites, and then the underdogs that you want them to be you don't want them to be terribly long odds. Although in scenarios where paying for the cheapest player might be like 4,800 when you have about 8,300 per player. Sometimes paying down for the cheapest player and punting, especially if you think that player can take one set, even though they're going to lose the match, it may allow you to get like 5 minus 1,000 favorites like Djokovic and like a lot of your studs. So that is a viable strategy, but it also just depends on slate composition. And I can definitely help you out with that in our channel on given days, but you have to take that into account as well. Sometimes you're maximizing your win equity is actually by taking one player who really doesn't have much win equity at all, because it allows you to get 5 players who are almost guaranteed to win their match. So in addition to maximizing your win equity in cash games, you want to be looking for players, especially on the men's side, who have serve upside. So in tennis, you may or may not know, but players get a quarter of a point for every ace, but they lose a full point for every double fault. So the aces definitely they're worth less, but you have players like John Isner and Riley Opelka who could hit 30 aces and 1 double fault. So they're going to serve net positive. On the other hand, there's a lot of women out there who are never going, they're going to have their double faults are going to outnumber their aces. So in cash games specifically, you don't want to be targeting very many women who are going to have double-digit double faults. You're capping that range, that 50 to 90 for a win. So let's just talk about a baseline 2 straight sets win, which means you win 2-0 and a best of 3 for a woman, for a women's match. If you win like 6-2, 6-3, that's pretty standard, or 6-4, 6-4. If you have maybe 5 aces and 3 double faults, we're looking somewhere in the mid to low 70s range, which is a good score for cash. To get above that 80 threshold, you're going to have to there's a 0 double fault bonus, which is pretty rare for women, and it's kind of rare for men too, because in the long matches, like, you're kind of likely to get a double fault. So that's a little bit unpredictable, but there's definitely something to merit to selecting players, especially in cash games, who have low double fault percentages. That bonus is not necessarily achievable, but in some cases you'll get lucky and they'll have no double faults. So to get over that 80 threshold, there's a 10 plus ace bonus, and that's way more common in men's. You've got a lot more strong servers out there who can get 10 plus aces. It's not worth a whole lot. I think it's 1.5 points, but that it can be the difference between scoring low 70s, mid 70s, getting above that 80 threshold as well. So when we're targeting those big servers in cash games, John Isner is almost always going to have 10 aces, and he's going to not double fault very often. So when you select a player like John Isner, regardless of his win equity, even if he loses 2 straight sets, and he's a big server, he's very hard to break. So a lot of times his floor could be losing 6-4, 6-4 with 15 aces and 1 double fault. So yes, and that's if he doesn't even go to if he gets broken once in each set and he doesn't even go to a tie break. And in that case, he's still going to score in the upper 30s, low 40s, just because of all that peripheral stuff. Whereas when you take a player who doesn't have that serve, that positive serve, if they not only can they drop more games because they're not defending their serve, if they also just don't get those peripheral points. So when you're targeting these big servers, it allows you to raise that floor, and even if they do lose, they can score in the 40s, which won't kill you. A lot of these players are going to be popular in cash games, but they can't for good reason, because if they do win, if they go 6-4, 6-4 and they win, and they get these bonuses, they're almost always in the upper 70s, if not over 80s. To add to that, to get over the 80-point threshold, a lot of times you either need to win 6-1, 6-1, or in straight sets and limit your double faults, or you need to win a set, a clean set, which is 6-0. And I mean, those are very unpredictable, and they're very rare to bagel another player, to hold them to 0 games in a set, but that's worth a whole extra set win. So which is 6 points, that is a total game changer, especially when you're looking at the 75-point range. An extra 6 points can definitely thrust you over that 80-point threshold. And I mean, I've seen some matches where they go 6-0, 6-1, no double faults, maybe an ace bonus or double faults, and that can push you almost closer to 90. And those are the type of players that you have to have in GPP if they're able to do that. Like, they're going to be in the winning lineup. So you need to have exposures to those players who are going to be big servers, and you want if in cash games, if there's players if there's a massive mismatch and you've got Djokovic facing a qualifier and the qualifier is 50-1 to win, and the matchup is right, Djokovic has a decent chance of going 6-1, 6-1, 6-1 in an event like today where they're playing best of fives. I mean, those scores are going to be in the upper 80s. So you definitely want to be looking at maximizing that win equity, but you also want, when you're punting, you want to be factoring in what their serve games are going to look like. You don't want players who are going to pull you down with the double faults, and you want players who are going to raise your floors with the ace bonuses as well. So there's a lot of things to consider here, and I know that's a hodgepodge of information, and it varies slate to slate and match to match and odds to odds, and what players and everything. And that's kind of why I can break it down to you on a daily basis. But those are all different things that you need to keep into account when you are building a cash lineup here. So in summary, your key stats you're looking at are your odds. You want to maximize your win equity. You want to focus on the studs who are locks to win in straight sets, because a straight set bonus is an extra 6 points. It's like winning another set, pushes you above that 75 threshold. I mean, you're going to be in the 50s and 60s if you're winning a match while dropping sets. And then the last stat you want to be looking at is like basically the player's serve potential. And you want players that are going to have potential to get over that 10% plus ace and get aces to get that bonus, or you want just in general to minimize the double faults, and it's an added bonus if they get 0 and they get the extra bonus for having 0 double faults in the match. In general, women are way less likely to reach that 10 plus ace threshold or to not double fault. So I would say it doesn't matter as much on the women's side. There you just want to be maximizing your win equity. I mean, aside from the Pliskova sisters, Kiki Bertens, Ashley Barty, I mean, you're really not looking at many players who can get over that 10H threshold or are ever looking at not double faulting, really. So hopefully that's helpful a little bit with the cash game side of things. You just want to be maximizing that win equity, building a lineup that's going to give you 5 or 6 wins. And if you're punting, look for those guys that have big serves. Like Opelka he's not a great ground strokes player, for example. So sometimes he's priced in that 7,000 to 8,000 range. His odds of winning that match are not that great because sometimes he's against a more complete player. But the odds of him going to tie breaks and getting all these aces, it's still there. So a lot of times you want to be targeting these serve upside people for your punts and to fill your lineups. So that's the only time that I would say you want to stray from your win equity in these matchups. So now moving over to GPP, I'm typically a GPP player here. It's my specialty. I've had great success in cash games, but there's nothing like taking down a huge GPP, $15 winning 25 grand. And that's why I'm here. That's what I specialize on. And a lot of that is going to be based on the leverage we can get over the fields. Just like any sport on DraftKings, you want to maximize your EV by taking advantage of ownerships, but also building these lines with the best players who have the most win equity and such. In general, if you're playing GPPs, just like any sport, if you're not giving yourself a chance to win and win by yourself or splitting only a few ways, you're not going to be profitable long term. Playing these to cash is just to cash and double your money is usually not profitable unless you're seeing a ton of overlay out there. So when I tell you my strategy, I'm helping you build those lines that give you a chance to win the GPPs. So in general, most salaries when DK and FanDuel set their salaries, they're based purely on odds with a few exceptions. So on a slate like today, we had a few outliers where Ali Kick was 8,300. She was priced like a favorite, but she was plus 360 to win. And Katerina Bondarenko was 6,600, priced as an underdog, and she was basically minus 400. Gave her an 83% chance winning the match. So that's a clear anomaly, and that can affect how you want to attack the slate. But in general, your salaries are going to be based purely on odds. So given that they're mostly based on odds, you would think that the EV would be basically the same. If everybody's priced exactly the same based on the odds, then somebody who's minus 300 should be priced as the same as another guy who's minus 300 at like whatever 9K or something like that. But the EV is not exactly the same because you've got your tennis specific scoring. You've got whether they can clean set somebody or they win in straight sets. Plus you've got your serve differentials, your double faults, and your aces. So let's just imagine two guys priced at 9,000. One guy's minus 300 and he comes in at like 40% ownership. And then there's another at 9K, you've got another guy who's minus 275. So he's not quite as big of a favorite, minus 275 versus minus 300. But because of that, he's not going to come in at that 40% ownership. He's the same price. He's less of a favorite. He might come in at 10% ownership. And let's just say that they have similar serve upsides. Your EV is going to be way better with that minus 275 guy. I would be going for the minus 300 in cash probably because that maximizes your win equity. But in GPP, you're getting him at 4 times lower ownership, and anything can happen in tennis. And you would much rather have the guy at 10% ownership in case he breaks the slate and wins in a straight set or something like that. That EV is way higher on your guy who's minus 270, the minus 275 coming in at the 10% ownership than the guy who's slightly more of a favorite, and because of that, he's coming in at 40% ownership. If you're not leveraging ownership, you might as well just be betting with a sports book. You might as well just be, or just sticking with cash games. You need to be thinking about what guys can I have under owned to the field, because a lot of the things in tennis that that make a big difference in scoring, like those straight sets and winning 6-1 or 6-0 in an individual set, they can be kind of unpredictable. And this is in two individual players coming out and playing. Who knows how one's feeling each day? Your odds are your best indication, but you still want to be paying attention to these ownerships, because this actual scoring may vary differently. As long as they both win, I'm sure they're not going to score the exact same, and it can be unpredictable in that way if they have the same serve potential. So when you're looking for those 6-0 sets or the straight sets players, you want to be looking at matchups, obviously, with where somebody's heavily favored, but also there's some players out there who are way more inconsistent than others, like Caroline Garcia in women's. Like sometimes she comes out and she crushes, other times she doesn't show up and she gets swept. So that can be a good player to target on both sides of the matchup. You might want to have some lines with her and without her, because she's either there's a good chance that a player from that match, whether she shows up or not, player from that match is going to score high. Right? That's just an example. I'm not saying she's the most inconsistent player out there, but sometimes coming off of injury or people with uncertain form, things like that, those are places you want to look in GPP, just because they give you that potential of the unexpected straight sets or the 6-0 clean set. So in general, talking about ownership, your ownership is going to be really driven by your Vegas odds and who's really the biggest names as well. So just to look back at our sheet today, we've got one matchup I highlighted earlier was the Katerina Bondarenko and Ali Kick matchup here. So obviously most people, if they've done enough research to look at the odds, you're going to see that Bondarenko's mispriced here. So that ownership she's going to garner a lot of ownership, but she's not necessarily a big name, so that'll limit her. The casuals might not pick up on her if they didn't really check every player. And then you also have to look at slate composition. When we look at this, there's not really another favorite here that's going to, in this range, who's really cheap. There's no other favorites that can soak up some of her ownership. So we take that all into account when you're trying to project the projected ownerships of the players on the slate. So I in our channel, I predicted her coming in at 55%. And the reason I said 55% was it's still GPP. So we need to take into account a wide range of outcomes. And when you're building lineups, you need to be kind of perfect here. So I liked the matchup for her to win. I didn't think that, given the fact that she doesn't really have serve upside and she double faults a decent amount, I wasn't sure whether she would make that final, the optimal line essentially, or just the lineup that comes in first place. Because I didn't know if she would be able to score over 75, and we were really targeting those guys. We want 6 players over 75 or a couple that are over 80 to offset that at the very least. So I projected her at 55%. She came in at 53%. Yes, she had high win equity, but people did acknowledge the fact that she might not make that final lineup. I came in around 70% exposure on her because I think that she will break the slate if she comes in and thoroughly wins, scores like 77. That price, like it's going to be pretty impossible to not have her unless you've really nailed some crazy underdogs down here, and that remains to be seen whether that will work on a slate like today. So we've talked about ownership and how you want to have players who have that lower ownership, regardless of what their lines are. So when you're comparing 2 players who are minus 400, you want to kind of favor the one. If they have similar serves, you want to favor the one that's going to come in at low ownership. I've touched on the fact that it's okay to have 2 ownership of both. If you're playing 20 lineups, it's okay to have 2 ownership on both sides of a given matchup. Not in the same lineup. You never want to play 2 players against each other. But it's okay to have out of my 20 lineups, I've got 5 of Opelka, and I've got 5 Taylor Fritz, who's playing him on the other side. So I basically got 25% of ownership of both, because I know that whoever comes out of that match is going to score high. Granted, one of them is still going to lose, but if I really think that matchup is going to have a really high scoring player, it's okay to have both. Exposure to both, because tennis, like I said, anything can still happen, but we can target the players with the upside in GPP that we need to take things down. So it's okay to not just be on one side of every match and to limit your pool to just one player in every match. But to highlight again, you never want, especially in GPP, to have 2 players who are playing each other in the same lineup. Since the scoring is binary, you're limiting your upside tremendously. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is kind of slate texture and slate composition. So on a big slate like today, we had 42 matches. It's a given that you need 6 for 6 winners to take down a GPP, but we also need to be looking, especially in these huge GPPs, the $15, 25K to first, 100K, like we've got 7,000 entries in that. We not only need to be perfect with 6 for 6, we need to be almost all straight sets, unless you have a crazy punt that wins and allows you to have 5 studs who clean set, crazy scenarios like that. I mean, you need to be scoring. You want to be averaging 80. So if you have a 65 in there, you better have some crazy other studs in there. So we're looking for all straight sets. And in a championship event like this, your majors, men's are best of 5, women are best of 3. So in general, the men are going to have less variance. They're playing more tennis in a major than they're playing best of 5, not best of 3. So for, let's say Opelka pushes number 1, let's Djokovic to 2 tie breaks because he's a great server. Like Djokovic is definitely a better player than Opelka, but tie breaks come down to individual points, and there's more variance when it gets to a tie break. So Opelka only has to win 2 tie breaks in a regular event versus he needs to win 3 tie breaks essentially, or like 3 sets in order to defeat Djokovic. So there's going to be, Djokovic is going to have more opportunities. He's going to have, there's going to be less luck involved in your best of 5 matches. for men and majors and things like that. That does raise their ceiling because they can get extra games won and sets won. Those scoring are adjusted for men and women to kind of make it even. But at the end of the day, you still need to be targeting your straight sets players. And women, I would say, have an easier path because it's still the same best of three. And women tend to be a little, I don't mean this in a bad way, but they're less predictable, and there's less big servers. They tend to get upset at a higher rate. It's just it's statistically proven. So on big slates like this, where I know I want 6 out of 6 straight set winners, a lot of times my punts are going to be women and my studs are going to be men, because the men have high upside. If they go 3-0, they win 3 sets to none. And sometimes you have to pay up for a lot for those mismatches. So I'll pay up for a couple guys like, say, Djokovic or Stefanos Tsitsipas. I'll pay up for those, and then I'll look for my punts as women and just hope kind of mix up those exposures. Obviously favoring the women that my data and my research points towards potentially pulling up, having better upset chances. But it's good to spread out your ownership. And if you need to fill your lineups with upset guesses or picks, I'd be going with women on these majors because there's more variance. They have a higher chance of winning in straight sets than a close match of men. The other thing I wanted to point out on a big slate like today is when there's 84 players to pick from, I don't think you need to go too crazy and try to be that hero and make a pick of somebody who's 7-1 to win. They're 4,900, and yes, it could open up a lot for you, but you think that, they might win a close match against Djokovic or a big star, for example. On a slate like today, I don't think you need to do that, because even if that player comes through, if they're gonna pull that upset, they might not score enough. Like having a 50 with a bunch of studs who score 77, 80 plus, having a 50 in there is not going to let you take down that GPP. So, I mean, there's enough options out there. When you have 42 matches, there's going to be at least 20 of those that have all straight sets. So I don't want to go too crazy and try to be a hero and try to guess that 7-1 player who ekes out a 2-1 set victory just because I know they're going to come in at 1%. It's just that their EV is so low because the odds of them not only pulling that upset, but also doing it in an emphatic fashion and winning 6-0, 6-1, something crazy, and scoring 80 points and not scoring in the 50s and killing my lineup, it's so low. So on slates like these, I try to more target getting the right mix of those slight underdogs rather than going absolutely crazy with underdogs in the odds, except for like some players like Kevin Anderson today. He was plus 225, but he has massive serve upside. If he does come out firing, or Zverev doesn't look terribly good today, yes, he could eventually win 3-1 or 3-0 and have that serve upside. So somebody like that, I would take the flyer on, but I wouldn't do it on like a crazy underdog on the women's side who can't get the double faults or can't get the aces, or is not going to have no double faults or win emphatically. So in that way, I would say I wouldn't go too crazy with trying to be a hero and getting that 1% really cheap punt. Just more focus on giving yourself lineups with a lot of win equity and potential to score 75 plus. And sometimes the women underdogs they can do that at a higher rate as long as they're falling somewhere between that plus 150, plus 125, plus 200 type range. That's kind of where I tend to look, and I'll eliminate some who I really don't like in the matchup, but I tend to even out my ownership across that kind of tier when I'm trying to look to fill my GPP lineups around the core studs and the men I really think are going to win 3-0 and things like that. And then briefly, just to touch on some smaller slates, if you have 8 to 10 to 12, 16 matches, I mean, that's a little bit different. Your lineup construction becomes more key because all the ownerships are going to be a lot higher on a slate like today. Like we have Bondarenko is 55% owned because she's mispriced, and then we drop all the way down to 25% with Taylor Fritz, and then everybody else is below 20%. But on smaller slates, you're going to have a lot of players that are over 50%. So it's okay to leave money on the slate, and it's important to do that as long as you're not sacrificing your upside. It's better to take those low-owned upsets more than on a huge slate like this one, because if you do pick that on a 16 games match slate, and let's say it's like Pliskova's minus 1,000 favorite, and for whatever reason you have a gut feeling that she's going to get upset, taking that $4,900 player is 10-1 to upset her. If you are right about that, you are going to have leverage, because Pliskova could come in at like 70% ownership. On a slate like today, when it's so spread out, the leverage you're getting isn't really worth giving up that upside. But on the smaller slates, the upsets have more of an impact, because you have to get your wins from somewhere, and you can't fade every match, essentially. So on the smaller slates, you can get a little more creative. You want to pay more attention to your lineup constructions, and then also you just have less matches to consider, and only less players are going to have the upside needed for GPP necessarily. So, and those on the smaller slates, I tend to run a tighter core, some guys who are higher owned, and then I like to fill in some of the upsets that I think can come in and give you leverage in GPPs. I know that was a bunch of word vomit, and I kind of just spit out everything that was on my mind. But I really appreciate your time in watching this video. I hope you had some good takeaways. I would love for you to drop some comments below, and I can hopefully clarify some of the points that I was trying to make. Or I would love for you to join us on Fantasy Sports Insight and join our channel, join our discussion. I can help you on a slate-to-slate basis, teach you a few things, help you learn to predict some of these ownerships, gain leverage over that field, and essentially help you make every entry that you put into DraftKings, whether it's cash or GPP, let that expected value, let that return on investment just increase. And let's take advantage of the fact that there's not that much research out there. There's not very many experts, and you can't just run a projection system like Osimo on a daily basis and hope and have any chance of profiting. So I hope I can see some of you guys in our channel, and we can discuss. We're going to get some wins. We're going to get some big wins this year. I hope to back-to-back. I hope that we can bring home another 25K prize this year. And I would love for it to be to share the wealth. And feel free to reach out to me. Leave any comments below. Again, my name is Jay Scott. My real name is Joe. I'd love to get to know some of you guys. And I hope this video was helpful. Apologize for just the mishmash of information, but love to answer any of your questions, and hope to see you guys around. Thanks.